With the Tenancy Act of 2019 coming into force, one of the big changes is how much security deposit a landlord is allowed to hold over the property. So this video is going to go into the rules about how you calculate the amount of money you're allowed to hold. Following the introduction of the Tenancy Act 2019, you will have to check the amount of tenancy deposit or security deposit you hold. The Act comes into law on the 1st of June 2019, so after this date, new rules will apply to the how much security deposit you're able to hold. The way the rules are set out is that for all tenancy agreements created on or after the 1st of June 2019, you're only allowed to hold a specific amount of security deposit. It has been specified in the Act that if the annual rent is less than $50,000 per annum, this is capped at 5 weeks' rent, and if it's greater than $50,000 per annum, then it's capped at 6 weeks' rent. Now, the Act goes into great detail on how you calculate annual rent, so it's worth probably just picking that up to make sure that you understand the calculation, although obvious, is a statutory calculation now. So annual rent is calculated either by the weekly rent times 52, or if you charge per calendar month, it's the monthly rent times 12. There is no other calculation. They are the two calculations. And for calculating the property's weekly rent, the formula is annual rent divided by 52 weeks gives you weekly rent. Okay, so that's the calculation. And obviously, then the deposit for up to 50,000 is weekly rent times 5, and the deposit for 50,000 and over is weekly rent times 6. So that's the basic calculation. So moving forward, from the 1st of June, this is how you will calculate how much security deposit you can take from the tenant. Now, the good news is for tenancies created prior to the 1st of June, any additional deposits that you have above the statutory cap do not have to be repaid to the tenant immediately. And the reason why I've put immediately in brackets is because there is something called a transitional period, which I'll explain in a minute. However, if you vary the terms of the tenancy after the 1st of June, you must then take into account the statutory cap, and if you have a deposit over the statutory cap, you must repay it. Failure to repay it to the tenant will lead the clauses in the tenancy agreement to become invalid and not legally enforceable. So here we have a tenant in property A signed a tenancy agreement on the 1st of April, paying rent of £1,000 per month. The deposit paid to the landlord was £2,000, and the tenancy period was 6 months, terminated on 30th of September. So under the transitional rules, the existing tenancy would not fall into the Tenancy Act provisions, and therefore the landlord can continue to hold £2,000 deposit. However, at the end of this period, the landlord and the tenant renegotiated the tenancy, and from the 1st of October, for another 6 months, terminated on the 31st of March 2020, the rent is increased to £1,100 per month. Now that is a new tenancy agreement, and therefore would now be subject to the new rules. So based on that, and looking at how the calculation works, so on the 1st of October there is this variation. The annual rent now becomes $13,200. It's below $50,000, so therefore our deposit is limited to 5 weeks. The weekly rent is £253.85. Therefore the maximum deposit we can hold is £1,269.25, which means that we now have to refund to the tenant a total of £730.75, because the £2,000 is above the statutory cap. So the Act defines this transitionary period as 1 year. It runs from the 1st of June 2019 to the 31st of May 2020. And what the Act says is that during this period, landlords, and if you use an agent, should renegotiate tenancy agreements. In other words, new agreements need to be put in place before the 31st of May 2020. After this date, any provisions that are in a tenancy agreement are not legally binding. So effectively what they're doing is saying that any tenancy agreements that are on some sort of statutory period, etc., and you're just rolling month to month, will not be legally binding after that date. You have to put a new tenancy agreement in place, which of course means you've got to pay another tenancy deposit, because obviously that's a new agreement. So that is, in a nutshell, the high level tenancy deposit changes. It's very important that you look at what deposits you're holding, especially if you're going to vary the lease in some way, because if you don't do that, then you will not be able to serve things like Section 21 notices until the deposit or the excess deposit has been repaid. Remember, the contents of the video you've just watched does not constitute advice. It's my opinion and my reading of the subject matter that I've been discussing. If you like what you heard, of course, feel free to subscribe. Somewhere, either here or here, will be a subscription button. Click the subscription button and you'll be notified when videos are posted to the channel. Somewhere here or here will also be recent videos from the channel and maybe other videos relating to this subject matter. I look forward to you subscribing and joining me on my journey and your journey as an accidental landlord.